Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show. I'm joined by my friend Malcolm Hoenlein, Conference of Presidents, Major American Jewish Organizations. We go immediately to the darkness visible of the Syrian civil war. Threats that have reason to be acted upon by the devils in the region and reason to fear by Israel and the United States. Malcolm, a good evening to you.
Good evening.
Syria will supply game-changing weapons to Hezbollah. The chief of the Lebanese Hezbollah said Thursday, less than a week after the airstrikes. Game-changing weapons. Okay, that's a cheap metaphor. It's thrown around all the time in sports contests. Why now? Why is Hezbollah? A week ago, you documented how it had gone from a year ago hardly admitting that it was involved in Syria to bragging about 150,000 soldiers to fight for Assad, and now talking about game-changing weapons. Where's Nasrallah going with this?
Well, first of all, it's Assad who's making the decision, together with the Russians, to try and acquire the S-300, something we have talked about, if you remember, both in regard to Iran and the canceled sale. But that is a game changer.
Ground-to-air missile system,
air defense system
that can defeat most high-performance
and would probably cover both Lebanon and much of Syria, and would prevent Israel from taking defensive measures, as well as any allied or other airplanes that decide to intervene at some point. So the thought that the Russians are going to sell these very advanced this very advanced system is very troubling. And Assad said, "We will give Hezbollah everything to express our appreciation for their support." So this is considered a game changer. It is as serious as any of the other missile transfers or even chemical weapons transfers to Hezbollah, because of of how this will impact the defense posture and the ability of others to move freely.
This announcement, this strange boasting, comes within hours of the sudden announcement by John Kerry that he and Mr. Putin have agreed upon a conference, a confab, a Versailles-like gathering on the Syrian crisis. Do you think that they're related, Malcolm? Russian missiles, Russian president, John Kerry.
Well, I don't know how you can talk about peace or trying to resolve the Syrian issue if you're talking at the same time about the sale of S-300s to Assad, which will do exactly the opposite, only embolden him further and elongate any this conflict and any other subsequent conflicts that arise from it. I think that this has raised a lot of concern. I know the Prime Minister spoke with President Obama on the phone about Syria while he was in China this week. There is a lot of concern about the danger of Hezbollah retaliation against targets abroad, not just in the region, because of their general weakened status. You know, it's estimated that 500 members of Hezbollah have been badly wounded and several hundred killed in the fighting, and that the escalation of their involvement, they were involved in the fighting with the Syrian troops in Qusayr, which resulted in taking back this strategic location. But it shows how much deeper Hezbollah is getting involved in the conflict, inside Syria. And this is compounded by the reports that the White House now says Assad was the one, the regime that used the chemical weapons and defended Israel's right to defend itself, and said there's close coordination between them. So I think the Russians responding to this and seeing their continued vested interest in Syria, sitting down with the Americans, not likely to lead to much.
Iran is the sponsor of terror and aggression in the region. Iran props up the Assad regime completely. Within these last hours, the United States expanded its roster of those violating Iran sanctions, blacklisting 4 Iranian companies, 1 individual suspect of helping the country enrich nuclear fuel. Malcolm, where is this going? We could continue to turn up the heat for some time. Does this mean that the sanctions are working, that more sanctions, more strict sanction enforcement will have a successful conclusion, or is this PR, Malcolm?
Maybe a combination of all those factors. The Senate today, Mark Kirk and others introduced legislation to try and close one of the big loopholes in the currency sanctions, which enabled Iran to put $100 billion in banks and foreign banks, particularly European banks. And everybody agrees that the sanctions have to be ratcheted up. They're not being universally applied, and that the Iranians continue to find ways around it. We've seen the attempts to delay everything until the June 14th election. In fact, the Guardian Council, half of whose members are appointed by Khamenei, are starting tomorrow to review the candidates. They get to pick who gets to run.
They will name 6 candidates.
Likely 6,
yes.
Right. It's not clear exactly how many, but I think you're right. I think 6 is the likely number. And they will try to assault in somebody from the opposition, meaning Ahmadinejad, which really is a strange opposition, and he's the moderate in this race. And they will try to push in your favorite candidate, Veliati, and some of the others. But, we are not advancing on the cause of stopping Iran, just as we're not advancing in the campaign to stop North Korea. Quite the opposite.
The significance of the election, and we will speak of this much over these next weeks, is that the supreme leader is encouraging the Iranian people to endorse his choices. They don't have a choice. These 6 candidates, there will be one candidate that the supreme leader intends to win. I think it's Veliati. This is not an honest horse race. This isn't the Kentucky Derby. It will be the supreme leader's candidate. And we know that the last election was concocted and that contrived, and that Veliati will win if he is the candidate. The military regime will stay intact. However, after Veliati's successful election, or whoever the supreme leader picks, Iran will be extremely strong, Malcolm. They'll feel confident that they've survived the sanctions, they've held an election, they will turn to their friends, and they have friends, Malcolm. China and Russia are 2 of them, and those are not insignificant.
South American countries.
They're not insignificant. They will say, we're a democracy, we've established a new legitimacy, and that the sanctions are incorrect.
Yeah, but that's one of the concerns, and one that we've highlighted, is that they're trying to paint Rafsanjani, Veliati, whichever one of them, as a new face, a new era. We have to look at this new one. In fact, these are the guys who all along were responsible, when they were in power before, for the nuclear program. They were responsible for the bombing in Argentina and are listed by Interpol amongst those indicted and those they are seeking, and that's why they're trying to make a deal, Iran, with Argentina. But they will try to exploit it. I think you're absolutely right. And the fact is that the Basiji are training in Moscow, that they're going to clamp down terribly. They're already starting
These
to
are the
limit
goon guerrillas.
the goon guerrillas of Khamenei, who went into the streets and they just viciously beat the people in the Green Revolution. So there are many people who are predicting you won't have a Green Revolution because they believe the West abandoned them the last time and are not going to take the chances this time.
The Premier of China welcoming Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, on a visit within these last hours, exchanging views, says the extremely dry Guardian, on regional issues such as the peace process as well as bilateral cooperation. They met in the Great Hall of the People. Is there business here, Malcolm, or are the Chinese posturing as if they're a great power?
No, I think that, first of all, there is real business. Trade between Israel and China went from $50 million a year in 1992 to almost $10 billion this past year, and it's increasing. There are delegations from China and Israel every week. The visit was to celebrate 20 years of diplomatic relations, much of which were very cold. They have warmed up. Netanyahu's visit is very popular there, and the Chinese are now introducing to Abbas, a 4-point peace plan. It's not of any substance. They are not a player. They have no real leverage in the Middle East. They have one interest, and that's getting the energy from whatever source that they can. But they want to be seen as a player. They feel themselves a global entity, which they are, and want the recognition, and therefore play in this field and trying to be a player.
Finally, just to flag this, Malcolm, a very strange story this week. We'll speak of it later if it helps to understand it better. Stephen Hawking, the world-famous cosmologist, making statements that it can only be described as anti-Israel, anti-Jewish. Does it make any sense?
Well, it makes sense, unfortunately, because there is this global campaign of delegitimization, and even somebody smart can do something stupid. He had accepted an invitation to come to President Peres's 90th birthday party, which President Clinton and others are going to be attending, to give a speech. It's a non-political event, and he came under tremendous pressure, as he acknowledges, from Palestinian professors and others, and said that he will support the boycott and therefore canceled his visit to Israel. Others are saying it was health reasons and that the statement was not really issued by him. I guess we'll get clarification. situation. But till now, this is very troubling, and people should not dismiss it. It's part of this global effort with the Church of Scotland this week getting involved, and others in really showing a lack of knowledge and understanding, but joining in a bias and racist campaign.
Malcolm Hoenlein, Conference of Presidents, Major American Jewish Organizations. I'm John Batchelor.